Okay, perfect. I'm going to put today's lesson in the Zoom chat for everyone. I'm sure you all have it already, but it's just nice to put it out there. Cool. So today we're going to be going over Docker volumes and bind mounts. I get a volunteer to read this opening paragraph, please?
Yeah, gotcha. Docker volumes and bind mounts. Volumes and bind mounts are both techniques for handling data in Docker containers, but they serve different purposes and have distinct origins. Bind mounts, available from Docker's early days, allow direct access to host files and directories, making them versatile for various tasks. Volumes, introduced later, are managed by Docker and designed for data persistence and portability. Understanding the differences between these methods will help you manage data effectively.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Jeremy. Yep. So as mentioned, bind mounts are, I don't want to say deprecated. They're still around, but it is an older system to use. Typically, everything nowadays is going to be on um, on a volume. It's just pretty common practice, but it's just kind of good to know what a bind mount is in case you come around and see something like that and you're not like blindsided by it. Okay, cool. So learning outcomes, demonstrate a clear understanding of the basic concepts of Docker volumes, demonstrate an understanding of how to share Docker volumes between containers, right? Because that's kind of like the big thing with Docker volumes is like persistence and the same data across all containers. Just pretty much a way of sharing and storing data between containers, and demonstrating understanding of bind mounts and how they can be used for data persistence. But volume is, in my opinion, a better and newer thing to use. So when you get the chance, you most likely want to use volume. But we'll kind of go into the details about it. So we got two lessons, volumes and types, and then Docker bind mounts. There's an assignment afterwards. I think it's a good one. It should take a little bit of time to go through, but it shouldn't be terribly difficult to do. It should be a fun one. Cool. So let's get into volumes. Uh, can I get another volunteer to read this introduction? A different one?
Sure. A Docker volume is a feature in Docker that provides a way to persist and manage data in containerized environments. It allows containers to store and access data independent of the container lifestyle, ensuring data persistence even when containers are stopped, restarted, or removed.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Flo. So Docker volumes is four things: data persistence, right? So same data across everything is how you can think about that. Shared data, you're able to share data between like a single volume, so like multiple containers. Um, Decoupled data management and portability. Everything with containers is pretty much portable. It's very lightweight. So there's three different volume types within Docker. There's named volumes, there's host mounted volumes, and then there's anonymous volumes. So a named volumes and host mounted volumes are pretty much the same thing. Should a name volume just has a name? That's like a big thing. And you just mount it on a container. But anyways, so name volumes are created and managed by Docker with user-friendly names assigned to them. They provide a convenient way to persist data in Docker containers. Name volumes can be easily referred by their assigned name in Docker commands configurations. Example command create a name volume. So let's actually just break this down. So Docker, right? You have the Docker CLI, and you're just calling volume, right? You want to do something with a volume, and you want to create, and then you're just naming it, right? And it will just create a name volume. So as you can see, we'll just do a Docker volume ls. Oops. This is the command to list out all the volumes in your Docker. Right now, I currently have none. So if I want to create this one called Docker Chandra volume, we can just run that. It'll output it, and then we can just run that Docker volume ls command again, and we can now see that we have a volume. Cool. You can think of volumes as like little mini databases, right? You can store like files and all sorts of good stuff in there. Um, yeah. So let's actually just well, we can keep it. That's not a problem. Um, cool. So host manager. Well, before I move on, any questions on name volumes? Pretty simple. Anyone have a question though?
Are
Cool.
they using, is it like volumes on disks? Is and you're using mounted, so is it like, do they use some sort of disk or disk infrastructure?
What do you mean?
Um,
Like where is it actually stored?
yeah, like
Yes, I mean, so it's currently stored on my disk, yeah, on my local computer, my hard drive.
okay, and
Yeah,
that's why.
it's not up in Docker unless you push it to Docker, then it will be. Um, but no, currently I just created the volume. It's just on my local machine.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah, good question though. So host manager. Any other questions? Cool. So host mounted volumes directly bind a directory or a file from the host system to the container. Changes made within the container are immediately reflected in the host directory and vice versa. Host mounted volumes provide a way to share data between hosts and containers. Example command to create a host mounted volume. So let's break this down. Use Docker and you're going to run -it. So we're actually going to like go into a container. So we're actually going to like create and start and run a container. And then we're going to name it Docker Chandra container one. And then here's our volume, right? We're just going to mount the Docker Chandra volume, right? Or you can put any other like file path that you already currently have right there. That's fine. That'll do the exact same thing. And then you're just giving it a path that you want to have on the actual container itself. And then we're running the Alpine image, and then just sh is just the shell that we're wanting to open it with. Do we have any questions on this command? I can break it down further if you guys want. But if you guys feel like you got it, then we can go ahead and run it and kind of play around with it. Cool. No questions. Cool. So we'll just go right ahead and run it. So this will create a container. It'll mount our volume to the container at this specified path, Docker Chandra path one, with an Alpine image, and we're opening it with the shell. Cool. So as you can see, we are now in our volume. I'm sorry, not in our volume, but in our container, and we have our Docker Chandra path one. So if we just cd into it, Docker Chandra path one, there shouldn't be anything in it because there's nothing in our volume, right? However, well, we'll actually get that. We'll explore a little bit more here in a minute. That's kind of how you just mount the volume to your container and specify what path you want it to be on. Do note that this does not have to be an actual volume. It could be a directory, a file path that you already have. I don't know, maybe like an SSH key pair that you have stored, or I don't know, some other kind of directory that has loads of files in already. You can just point to that direction, and it'll mount it. So you can mount a named volume, um, and then you can also just do a host mounted volume, which would be like any other file directory that's mounted to a container. Okay, cool. So anonymous volumes. One second, let me get a sip of water. Okay, anonymous volumes. Anonymous volumes are created automatically by Docker and are tied to containers lifecycle. They are primarily used for temporary or cache-like data that doesn't require long-term persistence. Docker assigns a random name to an anonymous volume, making them less manageable compared to named volumes. Example command to create an anonymous volume. You typically wouldn't create an anonymous volume. It's just kind of already like by default, there's already like a little volume created in each little container. I think it's under like user and then like there's like a certain path for it. So if we actually like, let's actually go find it. Oops. CD into user. Let's see what's in here. I think it's in share. CD into share. And then CD into EPK. Okay, keys. I don't know. But it's just like an anonymous. I don't have the exact directory for it right now. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's somewhere in here, and it just keeps track of like some little stuff, and it'll just get overridden all the time. But if you do want to create anonymous volume for stuff that you really don't care about that's going to get overridden and stuff like that. You can run this Docker run command and -v, and then just point a directory of where you want to keep that in. So if I just do exit and then I run the command, I'm just in, it just puts me in to the actual anonymous volume right now. And then there's not really going to be much in it besides like just a base Alpine image. And then it's going to be an app/data. So we just go cd to app and then cd into data, and then there shouldn't be anything in here. So that's an anonymous volume. You're typically not going to be using them too much, so don't worry too much about them. But the big thing to know is named volumes and host-bound volumes. Really similar. One's like a volume. The other one is like a file path that mounts to a container. But you could also mount a named volume to a container, and then it's just, a host-mounted volume. So that's pretty cool. Cool. So we've already created a volume. And then we've actually already looks like we've actually already ran this command. But anyways, let's go ahead and create two different containers, right? We should have the one up. No, we don't have one up. So Docker PS dash A. I just want to make sure we have a container. It's just not started. Yep, right here. Okay, cool. So we can actually just go ahead and start this container. Let me copy that and Docker start container one. Cool. So now if I just do a Docker PS is kind of like a list, but it just shows you all the running containers in Docker. But if you want to see containers that are created, just not currently started and running, then you just run the Docker PS dash A, dash all, and then you can see them, right? Cool. So we have one container, or I'm sorry, one container up and going with the volume. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually create a second container. And so we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna name this one Docker Chandra Container 2. And we're gonna mount the same Docker volume on it. And let's just go ahead. Oops, looks like I copied the wrong one. And let's just go ahead and create that. Remember, there was nothing in our volume yet. So both these containers are going to share the same volume. But let's see what happens when we start playing around and adding stuff to the volume to see if data is persisted across the containers via the volume. So this will create our volume 2. As you can see, we have Docker. Oh yeah, this one changed the path a little bit. This one's Docker Chandra path 1 and Docker Chandra path 2. The path doesn't matter. Per containers, it doesn't have to match or anything like that. But what is going to be the volume that we mount to it. Cool. So if we just cd into Docker Chandra path 2, and if we ls, we could see there's nothing, right? So let's go ahead and create a, I don't know, hello dot, I don't know, hello, I don't know, dot txt. Why not? And we can just go into it, and we'll hit I for insert mode, and we'll say hello from container 2, and we'll just escape, WQ to save it. And if you guys do prefer me to work in VS Code, and I can show like the actual files and stuff like that, that's totally fine. But this is kind of more of there's really not too many files here. So this is kind of like a terminal thing. Cool. So as we can see, we created our hello.txt with some text, right? So let's exit this container. Oops. Exit this container. And let's just do a Docker PS. Oops, let me hide my video things. Cool. So let's actually start our other container. So Docker start, and then what do we call it? Docker Chandra container 2, I think. So now if we run a Docker PS, we can see both our containers are running. That's fine. So let's go back into our container 1 and let's go check out our volume to see if data was persisted or not, right? So to do that, we'll just do a Docker exec dash, dash I, if I could type, dash IT, and then we'll put our container name and we'll just do sh because we want to do it in a shell. Okay, so if we do an ls, we can see our Docker Chandra path 1. So let's go into it. And we can see that our hello.txt is here. So hello.txt, hello from container 2. However, we are in container 1, right? So that's pretty cool to see that we can share data between two different containers. I think that's kind of the big takeaway from today's lesson is being able to do that. Like if I can remove stuff, add stuff, whatever, but they're both sharing the same volume, or you can think about it as database. And so it's very, if a container goes down, you still have the volume, so your data is not going to be lost. There's just loads of use cases of why this is super useful, and a good way to go about it. And it is kind of the go-to way, instead of using bind mounts, which we'll get into here in a second. Do I have any questions about volumes and data persistence or anything that we kind of just went over?
No.
Cool. Yeah. I think it's pretty fun. Cool. So let's go over to bind mounts. And doesn't look like this is too long. Cool. So introduction, Docker, and bind mounts. Can I get a third volunteer for the day to read this first little couple sentences here, please?
I'll do it. Bind mounts in Docker allow direct mapping of host system directories or files to container directories, enabling access to the host resources, sharing of data, and persistent storage. They are very helpful during development and testing when there is a need to interact with or utilize host system files or directories from within containers.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Stephen. So differences is a recommended method. So Docker volumes, okay, these differences, is recommended is the recommended method for storing data created and utilized by Docker containers is to use volumes. It may be interacted with using CLIs and APIs. Mounting requires volume name only, stored in var lib Docker volumes. Oh, okay, cool. So that's probably where that the anonymous volume is stored then, is in that file path. Bind mounts. It's older, dated method for storing data released with initial versions of Docker before introduction of volumes. Cannot be accessed by CLI commands, but it can still work instantly on a host system. Mounting requires a route to the host, stored anywhere on host. Cool. So let's go through this chart right here. Storage location. Let's see. So in Docker volumes, it's stored managed by Docker, typically in this little path, or you can actually specify a path that you want. Bind mounts are specified by the user anywhere on the host file system. Use case, so Docker volumes persist data storage, data sharing between containers. Bind mounts, the use case is development scenarios using host files and directories. The performance of Docker files is generally better, and it's optimized by Docker. Bind mounts, the performance depends on the underlying file system and usage. Docker file is easy to back up or restore using Docker CLI tools. However, the bind mounts require manual management and backup strategies. Docker volumes more secure with data isolation managed by Docker. And bind mounts are less secure. You have direct access to the host file system. Flexibility of the Docker volumes are portable, as everything else is in Docker, and can be used with Docker Swarm and Kubernetes. I don't know if we've covered Docker Swarm yet. If we haven't, it's going to be coming up soon. This is actually pretty cool. Yeah, we'll get into that later though. And then bind mounts, more flexible for development, can use any host path. Docker volume storing databases, logs, and configuration files. And then bind mounts are using for like sharing source code for development and bugging. The setup complexity for Docker volumes is simple and managed through Docker commands. However, the bind mounts require specific path management and permissions. So they're both, pretty decent. However, volumes are kind of like the go-to, more of the industry standard and like just the newer kind of path to go forward with Docker. Bind mounts are just kind of older. You won't typically see them too much. Cool. So let's do a quick little lab on bind mounts. Cool. So we'll first run an Nginx container in the detached mode. We'll name the container as Nginx default and open it in the browser and show the default page. Cool. So let's actually go ahead and exit out of this. We'll just clear off this and we'll go ahead and do the Docker run in detached mode. We're going to name it Nginx default and we're going to port bind it to 8080 with an Nginx image. Cool. Any questions on that command at all?
Don't think so.
Cool. So let's go ahead and run it. Cool. So we went ahead and ran that. We could actually probably just do a Docker PS and we can see our Nginx is running. And if we go over to localhost, it'll take us to the Nginx webpage by default. Cool. That's just to kind of get you going. Cool. So now we're gonna make a directory called webpage. I think I might have already, yeah. So I've already kind of made it. And then we have an index.html that has some HTML in it, right? We have an H1 tag. I guess we haven't gone over like HTML, but this is just basic HTML. They're called tags, right? You have an opening tag and a closing tag. The H1 just stands for like header, and the one is like the size of it. And then we're just gonna say hi, Docker Chandra. Yeah. I actually need to close out this container or stop it so I don't override the port on it. So let me do a Docker stop, and then I'll just do a Docker remove, and we'll just get rid of that container. I was just showing off the like the default Nginx like homepage. Cool. So now we'll do a Docker RM for remove and just remove it. Cool. All right. Cool. Now we can run this command right here to start up our own Nginx container with the same port, right? 8080. We're going to call it Nginx Docker Chandra. And then we're just going to point this to this index.html file that we put on, right? It's by mount. It's like our own file that we have on our local machine. I'm just going to CD into it, right? And that way I can just have a PWD as my path. You could just do like the entire path of it that you want that points to the directory of the webpage directory, right? Right here, webpage. And then you're just specifying where to display its HTML, right? This is like Nginx's default path that will point you to, their default Nginx page, but we're going to override that with just our own little HTML that we've created. Does anyone have any questions on this command? We're just going to create the container and mount this bind mount to the container. Cool. So let's go ahead and run it. And we do a Docker PS, and we can now see we have our Nginx Docker container up and running along with our other Docker, or I don't know, singular containers that we use for volumes. And then this one's our mount volume. Cool. So now if we go back to this web page and we refresh it, we can see that it is now using the bind mount with our index.html, and it says, hi, Dr. Chandra. Cool. That's pretty cool, right? How we can bind data or bind volumes and mount them, or bind mounts to these different containers and kind of see what we're doing. But we can also just go into it. So we can docker exec -it and we can name our container that we want to go into. This is bash, but I always use sh. Either is fine. You can do whatever. But as you can see, we can actually go into this path right here of user Nginx. And so we could just do a cat on it. So here's the path right here. So if we wanted to cat it shows up right here. Hi Chandra, Dr. Chandra. We can edit this, put whatever we want. That's just showcasing how we can use existing files on our system to put it up there. It's called a bind mount. But typically you want to have it on your local system. You'd want to keep everything in a volume. It's just better that way. Do we have any questions about that? About bind mounts or volumes or the differences between them? or how to utilize them. Cool. Cool. Yeah, I mean they both have persistent data. You can have bind mounts with different containers, like we did in that first example of the volume. You could do the exact same thing, and that would be totally fine. However, if anything happens on my local machine, it's not going to be saved by Docker. Um, cool. Actually, Jeremy, now thinking about it, and you asked me where the volumes were stored. Um, it is stored in Docker, but just not. It is stored on my local machine, just managed by Docker. It's in like a different um source on my computer, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But it is in my local machine. It's just managed by Docker in a volume. Cool. There is some documentation down here on volumes or this one's just by mounts, I believe. If you guys, want to go read some fun documentation on this stuff, there's a whole bunch of good stuff that we didn't cover in here. This is just like the basics of it, and kind of gives you the idea of, using somewhat of a database, if you want to call it that, with your containers. Cool. But with that said, I will, let's see, stop this and end the recording.